All right, everybody, how y'all doing? Y'all ready for a trigger warning? All you white people out there, we're gonna talk about race, is that okay? It's gonna be part of what we say. Evidently, we have to ask permission for that now. I'm gonna call the White House in a minute and see if that's okay. Please help me welcome the great and the fantastic and brilliant Sarah Lewis, who has this incredible book. It's called The Unseen Truth, and if you haven't read it, I would commend it to you, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. The great Charles Blow, who is... Y'all may not know this, but that's a Louisiana fella, right? Who kind of went off for a while and got famous at the New York Times, wrote a couple of books, The Devil You Know. Sounds like Mardi Gras, but it's not. We're going to talk about that. And a earlier book, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, that talks a little bit about his life history. But he comes back to New Orleans a lot. So Charles, welcome home, and you can't ever leave. If you try, we're going to come get you. And the great Kamau Bell, who is with us. Now, y'all might, when I see him on TV, I didn't know he was this tall because he's a big fella. But he did this thing where he went across America trying to talk to different kind of folks to see what was going on in their heads and their hearts. And then he wrote a book that I misunderstood. It was How I Grew Up Mixed Up. And that's not the title of the book. The title of the book is How I...
Well, no, it's a documentary called 1000% Me Growing Up Mixed about my kids and their friends.
Exactly. I was confused about him growing up mixed up and him growing up with his kids mixed.
No, I am mixed up, but
so we're gonna.
It's not about race. Well, maybe a little bit, but we'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about that. Well, thank you all for being here. I was trying to tell them, because I used to run this city with all of you folks, that this was Dixon Hall, where every kid that wanted to learn how to sing and dance and do great stuff actually came for Tulane Summer Lyric during the year, and it is a place that has brought New Orleanians great happiness and joy. So I couldn't think of a better place for us to have this discussion. We are in a moment, in case people haven't figured that out yet, and I think everybody's trying to find their footing and moving from emotions that are bewilderment to fear to anger to anxiety. A lot of it is centered around race. We're going to end this discussion with a conversation about the president's executive order yesterday, which if you hadn't a chance to take a look at, I would commend for your reading. But Sarah, you have really been digging into this for a very, very long time to try to help people understand and explain the fiction of race, where the ideas came from, and maybe most importantly, in this book, The Unseen Truth, about how people keep trying to force you to unsee what everybody should know is true, and we seem to be going through this again. So I want you to talk about that, but before you do that, I have a question, because I've been very confused, because I did grow up mixed up. I don't know, many of you, when you were asked to fill out forms, you had to fill out the racial boxes on the bottom. Y'all remember that? Okay. Well, I always had to do this thing called Caucasian. And I don't understand that, because I know that I've got a little Italian blood in me. I got German, French, English. I have African-American blood and lots of other stuff, I'm sure. But I never understood why anybody asked me to identify myself as Caucasian, because I've never been there and I don't know anybody from there. Okay? So, and it's such a weird word, and I never understood it, but I just never asked until I started reading this book, and I'm like, oh, hell, I know. So you're going to tell me where I came from, I guess. So can you start off with that in your book?
Apparently I can. So I hope I get invited back to the festival, because I'm about to tell everyone that there's no such thing as the idea of being Caucasian at all.
I'm just saying, y'all are all invisible now.
So this book began, The Unseen Truth, with recognizing that fact. And at the core of the book is really this question: when are we going to give up the lie? Right? And even without finishing that sentence, we all, with the affirmations, the nods, you know what I mean by that. When are we going to give up the lie that there's any basis for this racial regime of hierarchy that tells us that there's some legitimate claim for superiority at all? When are we going to give up that lie? And in asking myself this question that I know my extraordinary thought leaders and writers and leaders next to me have asked, I began through an unusual route. And it was looking at that term Caucasian. So as a historian, what I learned is that this was a term created by this actually graduate student who was a naturalist who coined the term Caucasian to define what we now call whiteness. And it was based on what would seem like just specious data, but was taken as fact at the time. The so-called beauty of the women from the Caucasus region, the symmetry of the skulls, the biblical lore. Genesis 6:8 says that Noah's Ark comes to rest in a mountain range close to the Caucasus region. This was seen as evidence for this graduate student in his dissertation, and so it became, over time, repeated so much that the term became fact as a cognate for whiteness. No one questioned the term until the American Civil War. Around that time, there was something happening called, and this isn't a metaphor, the Caucasian War, an actual war in the Caucasus region. And the reporting on that showed to everyone who was reading these reports that there was no such thing there as whiteness at all.
What you mean, like there were no white people?
There were no white people. And
That's what you mean.
Yeah,
There were no white
there's
people
no white people
in a
there.
place that they called Caucasian that became the word for white people in America.
That's right.
Just to make it
That's
simple, in case
so,
anybody didn't pick that up.
And so there's a problem that emerges. If the entire regime of white racial supremacy is based upon a lie, what do you do to cohere the regime? You have to create a narrative. You have to convince people of the legitimacy of this idea. So we retained the term and kept the lie. We can get to this later, but a lot of the entertainment complex that P.T. Barnum created was built on the ploy of this idea. He created, you know a little bit about this too, but he created a widely popular spectacle of a woman who was supposedly from the Caucasus region. And he just lampooned the entire idea of white racial supremacy. Circassian beauty, a woman from the Caucasus region. She looked like Angela Davis, huge afro but white. And so that was the beginning of this moment where, as a historian, I thought, well, wait a second, people actually knew this was a lie. So how did we forget this? How did we choose to unsee the fiction, ultimately? And that's what began the book.
Well, I'm going to come back to that in a couple of minutes. But Charles, in the work that you've done as a journalist, have you seen, what's your experience in this quest to kind of help people unsee what is right in front of them in the time that you've been writing?
There is a clear willful ignorance that people don't want to see. One of the...
Pull a little bit closer to you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Give me this.
Yep, you got it.
Give me this. He's bigger than you.
One of the questions that irritates me most, and I know that people ask it in good faith, is, can you give me 5 books that I can read to make myself smarter about this? And there are 2 reasons why that irritates me. One is, no black person I know was born with any instructions or higher ability or a PhD in racial relations. You just had to figure it out. There's nothing that I know inherently. I had to learn it all. I had to read it. I had to find books that appeal to me. And it feels always like people are asking me for the Cliff Notes. And I don't like that. The other problem, though, with it is that there have been enough books written on this subject to fill this room. The problem is not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of discussion. It's not a lack of literature. It's not a lack of art. It is a lack of curiosity because we don't want to know the answers to the questions. And what we do want to know is something that will make us feel better morally without being made uncomfortable physically or spiritually.
Thank you.
And the position that the question puts me in is that I cannot answer your question. I don't know those 5 books that are going to make you feel that way. What I do say is truly examine yourself the same way that everyone that I know tries to examine themselves. One of the most fascinating bits of racial research that I've seen was a researcher who worked in Cook County, which is Chicago. And she said, I don't want to examine what you say. I'm only looking at real estate data. You say you want a diverse community, but where do you buy your house? It is one of the most consequential decisions that any of us will ever make. And what she found was that Black people and Hispanic people would buy the house in the best neighborhood they could find, regardless of racial composition. But white people would even step down a notch to make sure that they bought a house in a neighborhood where they were the majorities.
Say it again. Unless you don't want to.
So
I just wanted to highlight that point.
So it is a self-examination question. It is, King once said about the civil rights movement that it was easy because it didn't cost you anything. It actually helped America to have integrated public accommodations economically. Fair housing had to cost you something. And that's why some of the same people in Congress who voted for the civil rights legislation voted against fair housing, because it was going to bring the issue to their neighborhoods, and that was the threshold that they would not pass.
Thank you. Kamau, you to piggyback on Charles's comments, you traveled this country. By the way, I forgot to tell you he's a comedian. I don't know if y'all know that. Do y'all know that he's funny? Yeah. So I want to ask you I think you're funny too. I laugh at your stuff.
2 comedians up here.
I want you to just, I'm going to ask you a follow-up substantive question, but just talk about the need or the utility of using comedy to get into places that people generally don't want to talk to so they can see themselves in it, and the mechanism that you use as a professional to do that.
Okay. I am a comedian, just to be clear. Got a Netflix special, so that means I'm certified.
Amen.
So I believe that comedy is the best way to communicate anything. That you can be talking to people, and you can be thinking that they're listening, but you don't know because if they're not reacting. But if you say something and it is funny and they laugh, then you 100% know they're paying attention. And comedy is also a way we all have been in tense situations or tense conversations with good friends of ours. Could be about something serious, could be about something tragic, and a joke lightens the tension. So this is I think it's like evolutionary human biology that we need humor to sort of lubricate our lives. And then on top of that, it is no mistake that the most oppressed groups in any country are often the funniest comedians. That when you see the history of stand-up comedy in this country, the leading comedians are often from the most oppressed groups. Now, they don't always get the shine that the other groups do, but there's a reason why in the 50s and 60s it's Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul. But at the same time, there's a Chitlin circuit where Black comedians are doing it. There's a reason why Elon Musk has never said anything funny in his life. Not one time. Not one time. People laugh around him because they're like, ha ha, you're rich. Ha ha ha. Man, you did it again, Elon. And yet, Elon Musk who's never said anything funny in his life, has hosted Saturday Night Live. Do you know who's never hosted Saturday Night Live, Charles?
Me.
You. You know who else? You know who's never hosted Saturday Night Live? Wanda Sykes.
Oh.
That's proof of racism.
Well, hold on. When people ask me, they go, "Oh, Mitch, you from New Orleans? What's the best restaurant?" I'm much smarter than to answer that question. But it took us 15 minutes, by the way, to mention Elon Musk's name. I lost a bet. I thought it was going to take 5, but we'll get back to that. But like,
Should have put me earlier.
do you want to take a shot at telling us who you think the best stand-up comic was of all time?
I mean, it's Richard Pryor.
100%. That's what I think. All right, never mind. I thought I was going to trick you. All right, so this is what I want to ask you. I said, as you've traveled around the country, you did this series with CNN. You made a specific point of using your history, your experience, growing up the way you did with your kids, to go around and to talk to people about, I assume, ways of trying to find common ground and thinking through how we get from where we are to where at least some of us thought we wanted to be, which of course is now evidently being debated again, like our history, some of which is not debatable, but we're debating it again. What did you learn and what insights do you have for people that are here?
So whenever I'm asked that question, I always remember that, I think it was season 2, we did an episode that was mostly on the south side of Chicago about black men who were gang affiliated or in gangs. We did an episode at that same time in Appalachia, which is how you pronounce it, throw in Appalachia. Thank you, one person. So I learned that on the show. So in Appalachia, and we talked to white ex-coal miners who were white. And now you would think these are two separate groups of people, black gang members in Chicago, inner city Chicago, white ex-coal miners in Appalachia. They want the same things: better schools, better pay, safer neighborhoods, more affordable food, better schools. And they want the same thing, but they've been told that the only way you can get what you want is if the other group doesn't get what they want. And so, as we have seen right now, politics, because so much of politics has been turned into theater, people are actually convinced to vote against their self-interests instead of realizing if you have what you want and I can get we can all get what we want. Instead of thinking that if I have good schools and good jobs in Appalachia, I need to explicitly screw over people in Chicago in order so I can get what I want. So we have been pitted against each other in a way that politics, because it is theater, they are more interested in raising money and supporting themselves than they are in the equality and equity of the country.
Okay.
Except for you.
So, you know about this pronunciation thing. If anybody comes around here and says New Orleans, we know y'all are not from here. Mm-hmm. And it's Appalachia, not Appalachia, in case y'all are in there, because they will run you out of there if you say the wrong thing. So this takes me back to Sarah. So Cheryl, I'm going to embarrass you. Stand up for a second. This is Cheryl Gerber, who's one of the best photographers in the country. Sorry, Sarah. Her business is making images and not just taking pictures. Her photographer's eye sees a certain story. It's not just the click. What's the message? What's the story? What's the point? What context are you trying to put it in? And my guess is that every artist thinks about that when they're singing or dancing or drawing or making a movie or making a documentary. And so your book is about the mechanism with which. And so I was so moved by it because it helped me begin to see the tactics that people used to stop us from seeing what was supposedly there. You saw it with the call to the lost cause. You saw it with the January 6th. And I raised this because just down the street about an hour ago, Bob Woodward was on the stage, and he was talking about President Trump. And he was asked, well, who does he most remind you of? And his answer was P.T. Barnum. Now, ironically, if you have not read Sarah's book yet, she says there were 3 people back in the early 1900s that helped create this thing. One of them was the president, President Wilson, right?
That's right.
Who was the second one?
P.T. Barnum.
P.T. Barnum. And so I wonder if you would help us try to understand like exactly what has happened and the images that we were created that allowed us to see the things that they're wanting us to see rather than the truth of, as we used to say in law school, the matter asserted.
No, thank you for that. So I would begin this way. I mean, the book, my work in general, really makes this main claim that the work of culture, monuments, images, the work that happens on stages of all kinds, comedy included, constitutes the closest thing we have to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States. And I say that because the foundation of this country is so unspeakable, and I don't mean that term because it is odious in some way. It's literally unspeakable. It's a paradox. So in order to actually express who we are, to tell the story of who we are, we've always needed other means. Law, despite the extraordinary force of a politician, of a leader, we know is not enough. We can't legislate ourselves out of injustice. We've always required culture, the work of the image, the narrative, because the foundational force of slavery dehumanized the gaze, right? Just the fact of the matter. And so what the book also begins with is one of the earliest thinkers who gave us the blueprint to understand why images, culture matters this way today, Frederick Douglass. He, during the Civil War, really risked his reputation to speak about the power of images at a time when people would have expected him to speak about anything else, and stood there and argued that this new technology, it had just been invented, would be the perception-altering shift. It would create the catalyst for productive change in American society that we were looking for. And the audience was deeply confused. They were silent as you look at the reports on the speech, but he continued, and he became the most photographed American man in the 19th century. Not Black American man, American, because he understood the counter-narrative force that a dignified, representative figure like Douglass could have to push back against the legitimating force of these racist stereotypes that were used to justify the inhumanity of so-called inhumanity of African Americans. This is his insight. And that speech, it languished in, despite how well preserved it was, the Library of Congress until 2015. We didn't know, scholars didn't realize that Douglass had made this case that culture mattered alongside the work of law and politics. And so he gives us this window into thinking about the importance of the kind of work that Charles is doing, the kind of work the extraordinary makers like Hank Willis Thomas, Carrie Mae Weems, Deborah Willis are doing. He says it might take over 150 years for us to be here together thinking through the power of performance, comedy, culture, images today. And when you ask yourself why, it has to do with this base fact. We have fictions underneath this seemingly legitimate regime of racial domination. And it's only been cohered through narratives. And the work of propaganda was done through the work of the image.
You used the word propaganda, and I assume you mean that in its most aggressive way.
I do. We tend to think about that term as connected to European history, right? But we need to put racist caricatures in that category of propaganda as well, because they were meant to legitimate a belief in order to create this regime we have here.
Well, what we just said in the past 20 minutes is supposed to, some people are now alleging, should not be discussed because your ears are too tender to hear it. That it somehow makes you feel bad about yourself. And that as a consequence that we should just really think about, the greatness of America and only the things that we have done well. And I want to challenge that directly. Charles, talk to me and come to about the need to confront reality and the truth so that people can, I guess, Kamau, as you as well, transform to the next place, if you will, and the utility of reading, understanding, knowing, seeing what is real, and the importance of actually having a tough discussion with each other so that we can get to a better place.
I often wonder why you wouldn't want to know. Like, what is the utility? Who is served by that ignorance? How does it actually serve you or your children to not know something that is true? And as a person in a community that feels under attack at the moment, it absolutely reminds me of Toni Morrison and her encounter when she was on the back of a bus with her mother. She was a young girl, and she said, "I always knew I had the moral high ground." And it is in moments like this that I understand her. I know absolutely that what is happening is morally corrupt. I know absolutely that enough Americans, a majority of white people in America, wanted this. And so I'm always in that frame of, I wonder what the enslaved thought when they saw the enslaver go to church. Because I have that feeling now. I have talked to enough people who are leaders in religious movements about white nationalism. You know, having one leader of the Baptist, Southern Baptist, talk to me about how he preached about the Sermon on the Mount, and parishioners after the sermon said, "We don't want you to talk about that woke ideology anymore." He said, "Those are literally the words of Christ." But when you are so morally bankrupt that you would restrict and repress your own religion, I know that I have the moral high ground. When I saw the slave Bible that they circulated in the West Indies, where they took out half of, almost all of the Old Testament and half of the New, anything that hinted at freedom, if you can't trust your own religious texts in the hands of others, you have no morality.
Amen.
And so I feel like we're watching that again, and people relishing it, and people, you turn on Newsmax or Fox News, they're literally celebrating, or turn on some other cable channels that have regular conservative guests, and they're literally celebrating, and I'm thinking, you don't see yourself the way I see you. You could not possibly see the damage that you are doing to any belief that I could ever have that this is legitimate, that conservatism in America has not been drained like a swamp.
Mike Johnson, who is also from right around where you're from, by the way, up in the northern part of the state, who's our Speaker of the House, is often on TV and says things like, "I'm a constitutional scholar," but he forgot to read the part about how Congress really is supposed to check the president. And he also says he's a
Scholar is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
He also says that he's a biblical scholar, but I think he forgot to read the New Testament at least.
Does he know what the word scholar means?
Yes. But I saw a clip the other day. They asked Donald Trump what was his favorite part of the Bible, and he said, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." I'm not making that up, by the way. That's not part of your comedy routine. But Kamau, as you kind of have gotten around, and talked to people, why do you feel like, with all the people that you've talked to and all the beautiful folks that you had on your program, why do you think they are so available to this obvious reconstruction of history at this particular point in time?
So, I want to say a few things. One, I think one of the biggest, just to connect what you're saying, one of the biggest problems we have, this is across society, across difference, is that if somebody tells you their truth, we're more likely to question their truth than to trust that they know what actually happened in their lives. That's the Me Too movement. That's racism discussions. That's discussions about a woman saying, I experienced sexism, and the man goes, well, I don't know, and they start to ask you questions to disrupt what you're saying. And so I think one of the big things we do is like trust when somebody tells you something about their life that that's the truth. And your immediate response would be, how can I help you? Not how can I dismantle your story? And I think white people get really sensitive around, I had a racist thing happen to me, because they think white people you don't want to believe that you live in that world, most of you. So you want to then say, maybe it was something else. Because if I believe in a world where this person had this racist thing happen to them, then I live in a world I don't want to live in. I don't want to believe I do, despite the evidence. So I'm going to say, you misunderstood. And so, like, for example, I was here in New Orleans a couple days ago. I called a Lyft or an Uber. Uber pulled up. It's never happened before. He pulled up. He looked at me, went, nah, and he pulled off and canceled the ride. And I was like, wow. And I've got a good Lyft rating, or Uber rating. I will tip you. So.
Was it a Mini Cooper?
What is
No.
It might have been.
See? We do it to ourselves. And I put it on. What'd you say? That's what I keep hearing.
All right,
But you know, I think he was from the White Shore. So, and I think that, like, even that, like, and I understand, is like we want to sort of figure out why that person was not. But like, if a black person does something, a black man, me and you got to show up at the press conference and justify that person's actions.
Yes.
White people get to kick him to the North Shore. And so until white people understand that those are your folks and you have to take responsibility for your folks, we are doomed. What else?
Sarah.
And to answer your question about, like, I do believe that, again, people have been weaponized. Like, when I talked to the KKK infamously in the first episode, it was very clear to me that those Klan members were just undereducated, underemployed, lived in a community that didn't have a strong economic, came from bad schools and all these things. And somebody had said, you know whose fault that is? That's not your mayor's fault. That's not your congressman's fault. That's not your governor's fault. That's black people's fault. And so a lot of white supremacy is weaponizing white people's economic, cultural anxiety and then focusing on it's the fault of black people when it's the fault of your politicians.
Exactly.
But even there, I don't want to give the space to say white supremacy is because of ignorance.
No.
The people who constructed it were not the ignorant part of the South.
Oh, no.
You know, if you read the Constitution Convention, is of every Constitution Convention that was called in order to establish white supremacy, these were the newspaper publishers, these were the businessmen, these were not the folks in the backwoods with the hoods on. These were the leaders of the community who showed up and they wrote the letters and they had the nerve to write all this stuff. Like, you can read it, it's in the minutes. So it's, you know, it is that.
Yeah.
But the architects of it were not ill-informed, poor, backwoods people.
No, I think of white supremacy at this point to be like a performance-enhancing drug. That it's a thing that is injected into the systems of white people to give them the sense that they are stronger than they really are.
Well, Sarah, what are the tools that over time, from when Frederick Douglass got a hold of it, he had some wonderful pictures taken of him because he wanted to be seen as he was, which was one of our founding fathers, I believe, so that people couldn't misunderstand who he was or succumb to other images. Besides just images or radio, TV, what are the tools being used today? Before she answers that question, just let me say to you, the Secretary of Homeland Security flew to a foreign country and stood in front of a jail cell where they had human beings. You don't know who those folks were. They're using images now to make you think. Some of it might be a little bit true, but a lot of it is not true. A young woman was snatched off of the streets the other day in the images. And if someone's a rapist and a robber or a murderer, as opposed to an innocent person that was mistakenly taken and put in that. All of that is happening now, and those images are being used today. And I want you to talk about the tools that people can use to maybe confuse us a little bit, to maybe make us not think too hard, to make us be able to not see what it is that you've talked about.
And Sarah, can I just say in 15 seconds, she wore a white top in front of shirtless men in boxers in those jail cells. It was a provocative picture on purpose.
Have y'all seen that photo? That was a piece of propaganda. Go ahead.
Oh, I've seen the image. I've seen the image, and the backdrop also shows and uses the different racks of where you're meant to sleep to really instantiate the idea of hierarchy too, and of domination, of confinement, and distance too. So the image is one piece of evidence of one of the forms of the tactics that we've used today. We've come to see that seeing is a political skill, and it's a political tool. Images are as important as any policy bill today. This current regime we're in, this administration, this era, I think, has weaponized the use of the image, and it is through the use of technology and media really pumped it out. That one example is one of many. Now, can I take us back though?
Sure.
In time,
Please.
Because I think we're under some misunderstanding that these tactics are new. And they're not. There is a playbook that is being used. So I want to take us back to some of the roots of it. When the segregationist Woodrow Wilson, former president as well at Princeton, became our leader, he created a regime that instantiated the use of vision as policy to legitimate the unspeakable. Federal segregation took place not by some bold, outright decree, but through these pointless, fine details that were sent out like sonar through the land, monuments, images, all used to cohere the segregationist regime. What's devastating about this early playbook feature is that it makes segregation impenetrable. Every day we are met with another executive order, something else to run after. And it feels as if we don't have enough energy to do it all at once. That's part of the playbook. That's not a new feature. So there, well.
It's the second time that it reached the presidency. Mm-hmm. I mean, most of us that live down here, I hope you all are honest enough to admit that this is nothing new for us. We've seen this for a very, very long period of time. And the first time maybe since the Civil War the Confederate flag made it into the Capitol was on January 6th. And you haven't had this level of racial ignoring, intentional pushing back down into the ground, trying to erase black people with the signature of a pen on an executive order, which I don't think Donald Trump understands he really kind of can't do. But he's trying. So we have about 6 or 7 minutes left, and there's so much that we could talk about and stay for 3 hours. But I want to impress upon you, if you have not taken a moment, to download the president's executive order that he read yesterday. And I'm going to assume that nobody in here's ears are so tender that you can't hear what I'm going to read. By authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, it is hereby ordered. I mean, he's not the boss of me, but all right. Over the past decade, Americans have witnessed a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts. This is him. With a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. This is called gaslighting, by the way. The revisionist movement seeks to undermine the remarkable achievements of the United States by casting its founding principles and historical milestones in a negative light. Are you guys too offended by being criticized? Hope not. Under this historical revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty and individual rights and human happiness is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed, rather than fostering, et cetera, and it goes on. And then he orders the Secretary of the Interior to determine whether, since January 1st, 2020, public monuments, y'all may remember we had a couple here, memorials, statues, markers, or similar properties within the Interior's jurisdiction have been removed or changed to perpetuate this false construction, and do everything you can to appropriately minimize that and think about reconstructing, these are my words now, the false narrative that they created to hide what it is that we have done. And so I have an opinion about this that I'd like to give after y'all finish. But I just want you guys to, and in the context of how are you feeling, I mean, and I'm not talking about just are you okay, but like intellectually, spiritually, as a creator of content for people to understand, how are you actually positioning yourself and feeling as an American citizen in this moment when you hear something like this from your president of the United States?
Who's what? Who's
Sarah. I'm sorry, the president.
There we go. There we go. There we go.
Sarah, you go first.
Really?
Please.
Yeah. I want to be mindful of our time, so I'll just say two things. One, I was grateful for the event and moment in which where I was when I heard that this came down, and that was at Howard University with Sherilyn Ifill to celebrate the creation of what she's calling the 14th Amendment Center. So the second founding of the United States, she argues, and I believe she's right, took place through that document. And in hearing her call for the reimagining of our future while that came down, I was fortified in thinking about the new forms of leadership that we need. Now, our friend Wynton Marsalis has said something that comes to mind in this era, this moment, which when it's time to go to war, we all get in shape. You know, that's how I feel right now.
Good.
Actually.
Kamau.
I don't know who here has had the pleasure and the gift of going to the National African American History and Culture Museum in D.C. I was lucky to see it when it first opened. I got to run through there for about an hour. I had a gig in D.C., and I was like, I have to bring my kids back here. I feel really lucky that I took my kids back there last summer, and they got to hang out there and see the museum. Kevin Young, who runs it, is an amazing person. And to see my 10-year-old daughter be like, I want to go to the bottom floor where they talk about enslavement because I need to know. So first of all, kids can handle all this stuff. Maybe it's because I'm a great dad, but it is a very popular museum. It's one of the most popular museums in the Smithsonian's community of museums. There is nothing that museum is doing wrong, and the fact is that proves how racist this is because it is not broken and does not need to be fixed.
Thank you.
You know, the slogan is Make America Great Again. I want to be clear, snatching people off the streets who are just for free speech and changing cultural institutions to match what the dear leader wants is making America North Korea.
Amen. Charles?
I guess the overwhelming feeling for me is that I wanted to believe that you were better than this. And I will never make that mistake again. We saw things. We saw people. I saw Nancy Pelosi kneeling in Constitution Hall with a kente cloth around her neck. I mean, there were things happening, and we're now in a full backlash against all progress that was made during the BLM movement, including the election of Barack Obama. And it is exactly, to me, like the rise of Jim Crow after Reconstruction. It is the same level of ferocious backlash. And I feel like a lot of people that I talked to a scholar last night. I had dinner. I was in St. Louis. And he's just broken. I think there's a lot of black people just feel broken. They're angry, but they feel broken by the idea that you would rather burn it down than share it. And so I have had to check myself because now I understand what Baldwin said when he said black people have a real desire not to be betrayed by too much hoping.
Amen. Well, we're coming to a close. So first of all, let me first thank all of you for being wonderful and brilliant. And courageous and clear. This piece of trash that the president signed yesterday is mendacious. It's duplicitous. It eviscerates any hope that he has in the humanity of the people of America to be better. And to Charles's earlier point that I would like to make for you as a white guy, I was on a podcast before and I was talking to black women and black men and I'm like, what's going on? And they said, man, don't ask me, go read the damn book yourself. You figure it out. He goes, when are you going to start to talk to white people about this? Don't talk to me anymore. So I guess I would say to all of you, this is a fairly, heavy white audience. From my eyes I might be unseeing things, but we look about 98%.
No, you're right.
I was going to make a joke, but I'm not a comedian, and say I haven't seen this many white people since the opening day of NASCAR, but I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not saying that y'all go to NASCAR or WWE, but I like it. I like bowling. But let me just say this. I know that it is a time where people feel fear because there's a lot to be afraid of, and you find uncertainty, and you're looking for your balance because you can't seem to find any steadiness on the ground, and you want to know what to do. I don't have a strategy for you at the moment, but the first thing you need to do is say no. This is not who we are. This is not what we do. If people don't know anything about the city of New Orleans or this area, people here believe our diversity is our strength, that it's our great value, that as wonderful as this country has been over time to many, many, many people, not everybody has experienced the joy and the benefits of it, and that it doesn't hurt your feelings too much to say that folks that might have been part of my family a long time ago might have made mistakes. It's not your fault, but it is our responsibility since we're the ones that have the power to fix it, and then our fellow Americans are relying on us to do the things that are necessary to reclaim our democracy because it's been taken from us as we speak. And I don't want to overstate this because I don't think it can be overstated. We are in a period now that we have not been in a very, very, very long time. It's not the only time, but it is one of such intense seriousness that it requires everybody's attention and commitment to actually see the truth and to speak to the truth and to make our fellow Americans feel comfortable that we all belong here, and it's all important because we're better together. Anyway, thank y'all so much. God bless you. See ya.